Thank you, Pete and Philippa and Joe, for inviting me here. I'm just going to move the screen a little bit so I can see it. Can you all hear me? I don't know if I'm close enough to the mic. Is that all right? Is it picking me up? Just thinking for the online people. That much shorter than Philippa. Yeah. Okay, so hello everybody. My first disclaimer is that the talk today is based on work that I did for my MLit, which was a long time ago, and I've not updated the maps. The maps that I'm using are what I published in the Archaeological Journal. However, I did do a quick check on the PAS, which is the main source for these brooches, and the distribution hasn't changed massively. There's a few more into the southwest, but thankfully I did not have to change my entire talk. And also at the beginning, to make thanks to Rob Philpott, who did the first work on this type of brooch, the note in Britannia, and allowed me to kind of take his pet project on, and also Matthew Ponting at Liverpool University, who did all the analysis. So I am not an archaeometallurgist, and hopefully there will be not too many tricky questions on that. So I got interested in this type of brooch when I worked for Portrait Antiquities Scheme, and it was a type that Rob had noticed was very much clustered around the Wirral Peninsula near Liverpool and Chester. And so my project aim was to create a detailed catalogue, a typology, and some standardised terminology to bring it in line with other brooch typologies, to look at trying to discover the geographic origins, and then also to carry out scientific analysis. This is the Wirral brooch. This illustration on the left was kindly done for me by the late David Williams of PAS. Lots of the FLOs helped a lot with this project, getting in touch with new finds. And its features are, it's a very kind of specific bow brooch. Right, I'll just about be able to do it. But you can see here, it's a kind of 2nd century bow brooch. It's got the head loop, which other brooches have, but it's all the features together. So the head loop with a stepped head, you can just see there, 3 vertical panels, which is always filled in with checkerboard enamel. There's a boss at the knee or the waist, depending on, and that's sometimes decorated. And it usually has a very steep profile, so it would have enabled it to take quite a lot of fabric, but then other bow brooches are the same, so that one's not unusual. And then the colours of enamel, which we'll come on to later, are very key. Here's some pictures of some of them. They don't all look quite so nice as that one on the first slide there, as all archaeologists will know. But once you know the features, they're pretty easy to spot. And I was very lucky to have the PAS database. So in 1999, Rob's article in Britannia had 35 examples, and you can see here this cluster around the Wirral and into kind of Cheshire, with a few odd outliers. In 2012, which was when I stopped my data collection, we had 117 examples. Like I say, I checked the PAS database a couple of months ago, and there's maybe 15 new ones without checking in detail every record or looking in new excavation reports. And that data comes from looking through every Roman finds post-ex report that I could find, HERs and PAS data. And what's really key for this type, and when we think about who was wearing it and who it was made for, is that of the PAS. The PAS data is by far the majority of the finds. So if you look at this close-up map here, the squares are excavated brooches and the triangles are stray finds, so PAS or pre-PAS kind of HER data. So it's not being found on big sites. It's being found in smaller on small settlements now, what we have as our rural areas. And I just wanted to kind of highlight how specific the distribution is of this type. So the map on the left, the red, it's now all triangles because I just had to do colours, is the Wirral brooch. The black squares are dragonesque. So that the dragonesque, very much a northern distribution. These distributions are just the PAS ones, just to do a comparison. But it shows that the dragonesque, which is, a kind of regional type, is still much more widespread. The trumpet brooch, again, northern origins, but spreads much further. The Roxeter, which is maybe a little bit closer to the Wirral in kind of being more location specific, but you can see actually it spreads a lot more. So they are on the left, the Roxeter's the circle. And then the Polden Hill, again, supposedly a southwestern kind of cluster, but much more broadly spread. And then just to come back again to kind of reiterate this distribution. So what I did was I looked at what I defined as the core area, which was Cheshire, Denbighshire, Flintshire, Merseyside and Wrexham, for people who want modern county boundaries. And out of all of the Roman bow brooches with enamel on, 84 were Wirral, 39 were other types of brooches. So it's not just that they're they're mostly found in the Wirral and not elsewhere. It's that on the Wirral and in that core area, if you're wearing an enamelled bow brooch, you're 2/3 more likely to be wearing a Wirral one as another one. So it's not just one person making them and not travelling out of the Wirral. There people are specifically choosing it. And what was interesting is when I did my kind of more deep dive on the data, is I got lots more brooches than Rob had found, mainly because the PAS have been recording. But the kind of outliers, that does work. If we see, so Rob had most of these outliers on his map already from the excavation. So the new finds that come in since Rob's work in '99 are all coming, as a lot of people find with material cultures now, they're coming through the PAS. But even more, there had been obviously excavations in that period, and very few of them were turning up brooches as well, the Wirral brooches. So I split my non-core group into 3 groups, because I obviously wanted to find out why were they travelling outside of the core area. And so I went for 3. Well, I went for 2, and then everything else got called outliers, so it made a table in the dissertation. So the Scottish Indigenous group, and here I have to thank Fraser Hunter for his help on this, is that obviously the Romans didn't settle in Scotland as permanently as they did in the rest of England. They were back and forth, but there are a lot of military sites which produce a lot of material, but none of the finds of Wirral brooches from Scotland come from the military sites. They only come from Indigenous sites. And Fraser said, this is unusual. Normally, if you're having them on Indigenous sites, you'd also be getting them on military sites. And Fraser did a synthesis of brooch types found in Scotland in non-Roman contexts, and he noted that definite choices were being made as to which types were used, with a bias towards types with clear echoes of previous native decorative traditions. And I think the Wirral brooch really fits into that, because when you look at, when we're talking a little bit about the enamel, the choice of colour and the design is much more kind of in sync with pre-Roman designs and colour choices. So that's really quite interesting. It's not being found on these military sites in Scotland. However, it does turn up on some military sites in England. Particularly, there's obviously a cluster on Hadrian's Wall, but there's always a cluster on Hadrian's Wall because there's just so many of them there for so long. And in my dissertation, I looked at 4 possible explanations. I'm not voting for any of these. It's just quite interesting to kind of talk about. It links well with Philippa's talk that you get some data and there's so many things that it could be. And this study was a small study, so I don't think we got enough, but it could be people relocating from the northwest, the Wirral zone, up to the military zone, taking their fashions with them. That's my least favourite, probably. Brooches just being traded or lost when they're going from the northwest to the military zone. And we know there's huge amounts of trade from the northwest up to that military zone, the frontier zone. So it could have been a secondary product or even a primary product. A brooch manufacturer relocating to the northeast. We know brooch manufacturing, along with a lot of the smaller copper alloy things, is very small scale, probably itinerant. It's pretty easy to pick up and move. So maybe it's one person moving. Not my favourite either. And a brooch manufacturer in the military zone copying a brooch when he'd been in the northwest. You just don't know, but it starts you to think about these possibilities of people moving. And then the outliers, we're just people, aren't we? People move around, things happen, nothing ever fits one rule. So I'm not going to attempt to give an answer for why there's one in Lincolnshire and 2 in Suffolk. Now, the key thing in a way that links the style back to kind of the pre-Roman, the Iron Age, the Celtic, whatever you want to call that sort of design, is the colour of the enamel. So red and blue are much the most common colour used in Roman enamelling in Britain. But on the Wirral brooch, orange is by far the most common colour. It was much bigger. But, and this might be a quirk of the very small data, not one of the brooches found in a fort or on Hadrian's Wall has orange enamel. So, you know, is there further selection? You can wear a Wirral brooch if you're on the wall and you're a soldier, but the orange is a step too far. Wild speculation, but you know, you start to think about these patterns and you think, well, actually someone has made a choice at some point. Just for people who are interested, the high orange is not due to different access to resources, because copper was the thing that was used to make most colours in enamel. So it wasn't just that they weren't able to get the things they needed to make red and blue. The yellow is also higher than the Bling and Butcher average when they looked at enamel colours on brooches, and yellows, orange, and the checkerboard design much more Iron Age. Here you can see the graph. So you can see the blue is the Wirral, and I compared it to the Bling and Butcher stuff, the big red, you know, Bible, and Margaret Snape's work on the brooches on Hadrian's Wall, the BAR, which just shows the real kind of, so the orange and the yellow are really key. So we know what the brooch looks like, know where it's from. What you're all interested in is metallurgy. So I was very lucky that Matthew Ponting at Liverpool had a big project and some labs and was able to sneak a few samples in with me. And then I also got a bit of funding from Historic Scotland to do atomic absorption spectroscopy. So AAS is a destructive sampling method. But again, I was very, very lucky because lots of people let me take holes out of their brooches. And it is also quantitative. I think talk to Pete for an explanation about AAS, because it's better than me trying to do it. And we were looking at the copper alloys, as Pete and Philippa were with the coins, but it can also detect levels of trace elements with silver, arsenic, cobalt, etc. And the colour of the metal, as everyone knows, plays a huge role in the visual impact of an object. The alloy is key, and you know, I think the Romans did understand that. And Bling and Butcher suggested that the changes in alloys with brooches might be linked to changing fashions. So copper's a more pinkish tinge, bronze is brown, depending on its tin content. Brass is much more yellow. And I was really lucky. I was able to sample 35 Wirral brooches, and I did 3 fragments of waste that have been found in a field by Metal Tetris, where quite a few Wirral brooches and other Roman artifacts came from. And really luckily, 4 of those brooches were from the Scottish Indigenous group. I was given access to all 5, but one was too corroded. I got 1 from the military zone and 28 from the core area. So I tried to kind of get a good distribution. And if you can look on this map here, so this is the distribution map showing them all. Bronze was the most common by far, only 1 brass and 8 gunmetal. And that really contrasts with Bling and Butcher's work, which said brass was used for more decorative brooches in the 2nd century. So again, I think that's a deliberate choice, as with the enamel colour. It's not that they're not going to be able to access the materials to make a brass. I don't think, you know, that we didn't find any difference in the any spatial difference. I was kind of thinking, oh, maybe the Scottish ones might be different, or if I'd analysed more of the military ones, maybe a slight difference. But it's a small data set, and you can see even on the core, in this core area here, it's just a bit of a mix. So the gunmetal ones are maybe just a different pot that they had that day for, you know, getting their metals. Ness is a site on the Wirral where they'd found 5 Wirral brooches, and with these copper alloy waste fragments. So that's what we analysed. Unfortunately, the nest brooch was leaded bronze and the 3 waste fragments were brass. So that was a bit of a dud, but it needed doing. And we overall, sorry, I do have a more scientific graph. There you go. So I decided to use this graph because it was, I can't even remember its name, I apologise. But it's the same sort of display as Bailey and Butcher used, so it seemed a sensible one to kind of be able to compare. And you can see they're all fairly clustered. And Matthew said that they're close enough to suggest a single source of manufacture, whether that's a static or a mobile workshop. They're not different enough. So I didn't find the workshop because we didn't locate it in nests, but we did kind of show that across the whole group, wherever they're from, they seem to be very similar. And this, for anyone who's interested in metals, I was really lucky because one metal detectorist was really engaged, and I have to say, all the metal detectorists who I asked if I could cut open their brooches, it wasn't cut, it was tiny, were really engaged, and loads of them were very keen. And this was bought by a metal detectorist at a car boot sale in North Wales, so no context, we've no idea, you know, it's from the key area. So he was lending me 2 of his actual finds. He said, do you want this one? So what Matthew did was cut it down the middle. Well, he sampled it first, which you can see the little hole here. That was really nice to be able to show all the metal detectorists that's how tiny the hole is that we're making, but also then cut it open and had a look at the insides. And it's also was a really nice feature. I used to take it out to talks to show to people, this is what the copper eye looks like now, but this is what it looked like, you know, when they wore it. So imagine that with all of the bright enamel. Now, there's my map with the manufacturing site at Nest. So you can see the triangles here are all the waste fragments. So they were making stuff at Nest, just not Wirral Brooches, or not that day. As with any brooch type, any object type, you're always going to have variant as well as geographical outliers. And it's really tricky. How do you decide when it's a variant and when it becomes a new type? And what I did in the study and in the article is I just kind of listed some of the variants. I think I listed 10 or 12 and said, I think these are close enough, but I didn't then spend months going through every report or every PAS record to say how close it could be. But it is interesting that it matches in well with that kind of long kind of timeline of, you know, this is a trumpet and then it changed slightly to a Polden hill, and it fits in with that. So some of the variations are, for example, that's got the 3 raised, it's some 3 raised lines rather than the enamel checkerboard, or this one's got a different decoration on. So just to conclude, and I hope I'm kind of in time, sorry, it's a little bit of a whirlwind. I'm pretty certain, and we're quite happy, that it was a local development. It's a local type that the brooch makers on the Wirral have come up with themselves, probably using designs from much earlier, but on a, you know, a Roman style brooch. There's a very specific choice in colour on the enamel. There are some with red and blue, but orange is really key. Happy with the 2nd century date, like the you know, many of the enamelled bow brooches, and that it's a rural market. So we've got in the core area, there's a site called Mells. I didn't give these figures, but there's 80 brooches from this site called Mells on the tip of the peninsula, the Wirral, which was a trading site, super interesting, published by Philpott and Griffiths. And of those 87 are Wirral brooches, whereas Chester, the Legionary Fortress, just down the road, 96 brooches, only 1 of those is a Wirral brooch. So you see, even within the same core area, there seems to be that difference in who's using it and where. There are other places in the kind of core distribution area that might have been manufacturing spots. So there's Ness, which we looked at, Irby, Court Farm, and Prestatyn, and they've all got evidence of manufacture of copper alloy. So it might, you know, potentially we could look at some material from there to try and pin it down. But I just love it because it's a really regional type. It's a very specific, some might say niche little study, but it shows what just looking in detail at one smaller group can do if you look at all elements. And I never did any enamel analysis. I'd like to analyse more of the military zone and maybe some of the more potential manufacturing site. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that fantastic study. We have time for a couple of quick questions. Francis?
An observation rather than a question. You were saying you maybe thought they should be made of brass. Well, a lot of the 2nd century brass, highly decorated brooches are continental manufacture of British ones.
Okay.
And I think that's why they're brass.
Yeah.
Rather than you get the way.
Yeah.
Mostly leaded bronze like you've got is very common.
Okay, thank you.
But also,
Thanks, Francis. I hope you enjoyed that and you enjoyed the original study we published it. I was not struck by the analytical plot. You said there's no, you can so much to the pattern, but it's striking that the 3 Scottish examples are gun metal rather than anything else. But then when you show the term in the diagram, the bronzes and the gunmetals have a bit of a kind of overlap in the margins. And it didn't make me think it's probably a question after Peter for Justine. It's labels, it's the label we use when we're simplifying these things. So
Yeah.
we see bronze versus gunmetal on the plot that we're seeing on the screen now. That, the right and the middle end, there really is an overlap there between the two. And it'd be interesting in a way to try to tease that apart. That's maybe where the more minor elements might come.
Yeah, I think so. It's the same as when you give an object type, you say it's a trumpet variant, or it's where are the boundaries, isn't it?
Absolutely, and that's one of the real challenges, is to show these active processes how that blends in together. While we have, but we have to also make these attractions at the same time. So there's a real, I mean, just in the line talk about this very good.
I think the where you draw the lines, as you can see with the ternary diagram, you can have any composition you like. And sometimes you're lucky, like your fragments with brass, they're completely different from everything else. So you knew it's not related to those brooches. But here, this is really showing you have, if you like, a continuum. The majority of these brooches are bronzes, some of them with considerable amounts of lead in them. And it's as you move to the left towards the zinc corner, you're getting minor and then slightly less minor additions of zinc. And it's where you draw the line. And certainly my use of these diagrams, it's the ratio between tin and zinc I was using. But equally, I just looked at a scatter plot, and where you've got clusters, you draw a line in between. So it's there's no magic as to where the boundary is. Any composition is possible, and I think going forward we need to see if other minor elements, trace elements, help us in making new decisions about where things should be classified.
Yeah.
But it is continued, as you say, with break times,
Yeah.
and we just have to. We've got lots to learn.
Yeah, and I think if you've got the data, because Matthew took all the data, we just looked at the main 3, but we have that data. So hopefully, once you get further on, you can look at the trace things. Yeah.
Thanks. Just like one last question for now, basically, change over to space.
Okay.
Like when you do the ternary diagram, I assume what you're doing is sort of normalized, but to 100% whatever percentage of alloying elements you have. So I think that to properly read that diagram, you need to have next to it a diagram showing how much alloying elements is there, because otherwise it what seems very similar, like overlapping the gunmetal with bronze, could be completely different, because perhaps that object has 20% of alloying elements and the other one has just 1% of alloying elements. And because the ternary diagram normalizes that, you need also a diagram showing how many alloying elements are. I don't know if
I absolutely have no idea how to answer that.
Sorry.
No, it's fine.
I mean, I can briefly say that for most Roman brooches, which we're looking about here, you've got a similar copper content in all of them, whatever animal they are. But yes, you are absolutely right. And point on that diagram, it's a relative amount you're looking at. And so unless your bulk composition is reasonably similar, then you're not actually left the same at all. But I think in this case, it's going to be okay.
All right, thank you very much.
We have many people joining us online, so I just want to quickly ask Francis a question from Richard Hobbs online. And that was around the use of orange enamel, which obviously the as cast colour would be very orange and brown. The contrast there isn't so great between orange enamel and a pre-corroded cloth.
Yeah, I used to say when I gave kind of bigger talk, longer talks to say local groups, I was joking like quite you know, it's a Scouse Bling brooch. The colours don't really work in our modern mind, and I think that's what I found really interesting when I started to look at enamels and colours, is that we think about what colours match and what don't, and the contrast from a kind of modern fashion sense almost. And so yeah, it's interesting that how close that orange might have been, and I haven't looked into how much the orange would decayed, and we know a lot that lots of them go to like white and green, but yeah, the orange, how different it would be, and good point.